what does performance management mean to you?
Performance management is the discipline that deals with achieving desired results. In doing so, organizations and individuals, families, nations have to use a structured approach by clarifying exactly what is there to be achieved, which partially deals with strategy, but also clarifying how this will be measured, so you get an idea of achievement. Making the link between these two elements is the act of actively managing performance, incorporating this into a coordinated effort comparable to a journey from the current state to the desired state. That's how I would put it.
What is the relation between performance management and strategic planning?
Organizations and, in general, entities, we can also talk about departments, about even individuals, as mentioned, even about nations, are better off having a clear idea of where do I want to get to. There is a famous saying that a trip of 1,000 steps starts with the first one. Well, it's important to have a clear idea of exactly where are we heading towards, so that efforts can be coordinated towards the achievement of this. Now, strategy is at the core of establishing the direction. Following this, the act of getting on the journey, it's something that can be encapsulated under the idea of performance management, getting there.
Which are the main challenges organizations face in developing strategy and managing performance?
Recently, I analyzed the data from about 30 interviews that I conducted with senior, middle management and frontline employees on how do they see performance management in their organization. What I found are some very interesting patterns, some clusters of ideas. One of the key clusters that emerged was related to having a performance culture in the organization. Lots of them expressed their feeling that components are in place, tools are in place, reports are in place, software is in place, but what is missing is the buy-in from employees, the understanding from employees into what these tools, what the system overall means to them, what's in it for them, and also even on behalf of management. It wasn't a unified approach across the organization. Another interesting aspect to culture in general is oftentimes we talk about culture overall, the organizational culture, but in actual fact we also have microcultures within organizations. IT departments might be more advanced and more acceptable of the idea of measurement as opposed to perhaps, let's say, legal departments or even HR departments, surprisingly, sometimes. So a challenge in organizations is also sharing how they approach this and trying to unify and to learn from their lessons into this direction. So that's one aspect, culture. A second aspect supporting this is communications. Sometimes organizations are not good enough in how they communicate internally and externally in relation to strategy and performance, what is happening in this space. Oftentimes performance results are not made available to the right people in the organization based on concerns of confidentiality of data. So transparency is linked to building a performance culture. A third aspect is related to time and timeliness. The idea of doing things at the right time. Sometimes you might need to wait until things settle down or until other initiatives have completed before embarking on such a journey. That's the idea of timeliness. On the other hand, oftentimes staff members complain of the fact that they don't have time to do these things. I have so much things to do, I don't have time to deal with generating performance reports, submitting data, or even looking at the data, processing performance results. This is something that needs to be dealt with. It's a challenge in organizations on how to address this aspect. As you can see, there is a common pattern that connects all of them. Performance culture, communications and transparency, time and timeliness. It's all about going beyond tools, systems, and hardware into people and what performance means to people and how we can get them to enjoy the idea of performance.
Please provide some examples of organizations which you would recommend for study due to their approach to performance management and achievement?
There are several organizations on different continents that I want to mention. One of them is Canon of Japan, a well-known company that operates in the consumer electronics field mainly, but not only, have very strong technologies in imaging in general. Canon has a very interesting strategic planning approach, looking at a long time horizon of about 20 to 25 years, broken apart in chunks of 5 years and then into smaller components. A very interesting approach that is more common these days in national organizations, but not necessarily in corporates. I had participants at some training courses that said that, well, it's unheard of for a commercial organization to have a 25 years plan. For a country, yes, you might have a national vision of 25 years in advance, but not for a commercial company. So this is why I think it's an interesting company to analyze. In addition, another company I want to mention is Eskom, utility companies from South Africa. I had a few participants from this company at previous training courses, and I was surprised to see the level of maturity that they had in place in relation to their performance management system. More than that, I had discussions with other participants from the same industry at other training courses that spoke very highly of Eskom as being known as one of the best run utility companies in the world. A different example that I want to give is Al Baik from Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. The surprising thing about Al Baik is that most of the people I spoke to about Al Baik spoke very highly of the company. It's a fast food company established by a local entrepreneur that is surprisingly popular in the Jeddah region. I had the opportunity to test their customer feedback system. I provided them with feedback following a visit to one of their stores. The next day I received an email following up on the suggestion that I dropped in one of their boxes the night before. I was very impressed with the speed of following up. And overall, I think it's one of the companies that is worth analyzing in more depth. Another company that I'd like to mention is Target in the United States, well-known retailer with a very interesting approach in terms of big data and analytics. And eventually, performance management is also about understanding more about data. And I think they can be looked at as an example. They were one of the pioneers in hiring statisticians to process large volumes of data. And their stock price evolution in the last 10 years proves that they've been quite successful and they convinced the market in relation to their results. I haven't followed them recently, so I'm not sure what's happening in more recent times. But overall, I think it's a case study to look at. These would be some of the companies that I would mention from around the world.
What would you recommend as an approach for building a performance-oriented culture?
Communicate, communicate, communicate. Be transparent. Use a combination of approaches. One of my favorite topics to explore in conjunction with building a performance culture is gamification. Gamification is different from gaming. Usually at training courses we talk both about gaming performance results, but also about gamification as an approach to get employees engaged through the idea of having a competition, which can be organized between teams or between employees. There are some interesting examples on how organizations approach gamification. Australia Post at some point had a Retail Star Award offered to post offices in Australia. I know the hotel in London that established a competition between the housekeeping staff. They had a ladder that was updated on a regular basis based on their performance results. So it's an interesting approach of getting the buy-in. In addition, transparency, as mentioned previously, is very important. Being transparent internally and externally. Being proud of achieving results, but also being open in relation to acknowledging the areas that require improvement and dealing with them. Letting the staff know that, yes, it's not all good news. These are the challenges. Let's approach them together. So this type of transparency can be appreciated. I came across the example of a shipping company that established an external website dedicated to presenting their performance results in relation to timeliness. Now, these results were not meant, traditionally, you would think that would be of interest for the organization internally, management and staff, but their approach was to make this information available to the general public and especially to prospective clients, so that the numbers would speak for themselves, and they looked at performance results as an approach to attracting additional customers. Other approaches that I would mention in relation to building a performance culture would be making information visible across the organization, using LCD TVs, using posters, using roll-up banners, using a variety of hardware, I would call this hardware, to push the information out of computer screens into the environment around us. In addition to that is to link the idea of performance management, the idea of using performance management systems to day-to-day activities and to what it means for everybody. So that is not something that management wants us to do as employees. It's something that we do because it adds value. It enriches our lives. It makes our jobs easier in our activities. And that's about also identifying key messages that reflect a positivist approach to performance management.
How do you see the evolution of performance management field?
In answering such a question, I would also look at some breadcrumbs, things that we can pick from around us that can eventually lead us to a trail. Some of the things that we can identify is, on one hand, these days it's much more easier to gather data than it was, let's say, even 10 years ago, even 20 years ago. I'm talking here not just about software. Software evolved a lot. We have mobile BI these days, mobile business intelligence. I'm also talking about hardware. A variety of tools that enable us to gather the data in a seamless way. And this is one of the major challenges that organizations had to face historically. It's not about identifying KPIs, but also how do we get the data. I would compare this to where we were, let's say, about even 500 years ago or 2,000 years ago in terms of navigating on the sea. Navigators, explorers would have to rely on manual data gathering. They would have to look at stars, they would have to look at using the compass, the sextant, a variety of instruments that would require manual intervention. Well, these days, if you want to go fishing, you have a GPS that positions you exactly where you want to go. You even can use scanners of the bottom to identify where fish are. You can communicate with radio with other boats to get assistance. So it's a lot more easier to get the data. And again, I'm talking about hardware. We are also talking about software that enables the utilization of hardware. This will continue to evolve and will enable us to be able to capture much bigger volumes of data than ever before, which will also enable us to have access to meaningful data in the future. One of the limitations that oftentimes course participants mention in the KPI Institute's training courses is the fact that we have heard that we need to limit the number of KPIs to a few, the most meaningful ones. Well, historically, this was also a limitation given by the availability of data. Today, we can easily capture much more data than before. So then what is the issue with having a variety of indicators that pinpoint exactly where we are at in conjunction with different objectives? The metaphor that I generally use is the one of airplane cockpits. There are probably hundreds of dials and measurement instruments that are available to pilots. They don't have to look at all of them all the time. Upon takeoff, there is a set of such dials that require attention, that are of use. During the flight, there is another set. Upon landing, there is another set. In addition, there are also some alerts that can come up during the flight that need to be dealt with. I would look at this metaphor as a way to present the future of how performance management using KPIs and using BIs can be used in organizations as a discipline. We can measure larger volumes of data, and we can pay attention, we can focus on what really matters when we need it. So it's about having an open mind in this direction. Measurement, in addition to being enabled by technology, also requires open-mindedness on behalf of the general public, not just managers. The general public, and I'm talking here about employees, about even citizens in different countries, need to express more interest in this. Let's go beyond words and look at numbers. A recent newsletter published by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation mentions very highly of the idea of measurement. In the newsletter, measurement is presented in the context of non-profit work, so non-governmental organizations' efforts, and how they can be improved, how the results of such efforts can be improved by using measurement, by learning and recalibrating things and evaluating if things actually work or not. So this openness of the idea of measurement, not just in the context of for-profit organizations, non-profit organizations, but also in the context of countries. Entire political systems can be evaluated much more objectively by looking at numbers instead of politician promises. This is another direction in which the entire field can be seen evolving. And also a connection between components, all these components that exist at different levels. Such an example that I want to give is life logging. It's a term that expresses the idea of keeping track of certain biometrics or certain metrics in general that relates to someone's life. For example, number of hours of sleep per night, number of steps per day, number of, let's say, minutes of intense physical activity based on a certain heart rate, the heart rate in general. These are some metrics that these days can be easily captured by a variety of bracelet and smart watches, wearable tech as it's called. This is just the beginning. This can be extended into keeping track of additional metrics at the chemical level, for example, doing tests. And the opportunity here is for persons to learn more about themselves and recalibrate what they want to achieve to eventually manage themselves better, which is one of the themes of a famous Peter Drucker article, Managing Oneself. So at this stage, from what I presented, I think certain steps can be identified in terms of a possible roadmap. The connection between personal performance management, someone managing his or her own life, all the way to national performance management. How do we manage the performance of a nation? In between, having pockets of additional levels in which performance management systems are used. In non-profit organizations, in departments, in communities, in families even. This is why one of our taglines that we use in conjunction with, at the KPI Institute with one of our newsletters, Performance Today, is a world of connected performance. It's the idea of integrating performance management across levels, all the way from nations to persons. It's an opportunity that it's worth pursuing because it's a matter of linking performance management to happiness and maybe even to world peace.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.